إنا للجنة بالأندلس مجتلى حسن ورايا نفسي إنا للجنة.
Good. So we are here talking about Maimonides, the same guy we talked about last class. And last class we were talking about Maimonides, the philosopher. Today I want to speak about his rabbinical role. But as I said before, the two are very much merged. So he has a lot of philosophy in his rabbinical work, and he has. And of course, his Judaism also speaks through his philosophy. Now, there's one thing I want to go back to last class, because the last few slides I didn't have time to finish. And that is pretty important. His work, the work of his philosophical work, is the Guide of the Perplexed. Why is this so important? Of course, I could say, oh, yeah, we didn't cover it, fine. But next week, we're going to talk about his son. But then we have a whole week, 2 other classes, that we're going to talk about the reactions in the Jewish world on Maimonides. So there was a whole controversy. People were against him. People were in favor of him. And it was like not a civil war, but there wasn't any real violence, but it was a lot of animosity, all based on his writings. And the Guide of the Perplexed, his book on his philosophical work, played a very big part in that. So the Guide of the Perplexed, I just want to go through that briefly, because it is important. And the Guide of the Perplexed is, once again, a philosophical work. It's written in Arabic, Judeo-Arabic. You see an image here, so it's really Arabic with Hebrew letters, as all Judeo-Arabic is. So a few notions from his Guide of the Perplexed. He makes a few points that he argues. He talks about evil, for instance. He says evil doesn't come from God, and evil comes from humans because humans have been given free will. He believes that God does not determine the acts of people. People have free will. Therefore, they are able to go against God's will and do the wrong thing in life. And therefore, there is evil. It is because of the ego of people. That's one thing. But people might say, the second point of this slide, but there is evil in diseases. There are illnesses that some illnesses were not designed in labs. Remember the good old days. And there are earthquakes, and people die because of that, and fires and stuff like that. He says, well, and death in general. Maimonides says that is not necessarily evil, even though it is unpleasant. However, it is a necessary part of creation. You have the laws of production and destruction. If there is no death, there can be no life. If let's say a tree doesn't die, then and decomposes, then there can be no mushrooms growing on it. There can be no other plants coming from it. Everything for us to live, we need to eat, and what we eat is all stuff that was once alive and was either killed or cooked for our purpose. It doesn't matter. Yes, of course, you can be vegetarian, but still you will eat broccoli maybe, and the broccoli was a living, happily growing plant, maybe. I don't know if broccoli experiences happiness, but in any case, you need destruction for production, you need destruction for life, and that is just, according to Maimonides, how the world is created. That is not, he says, it could be painful, but that is not necessarily evil. God knows, what the consequences are. There's suffering, but evil is different. Another point, unfortunately, I have to go very briefly. I think that all these points would merit beautiful discussions. And so when bad things happen to good people, Part of it is the evil that happens by other people. And so the first point of Maimonides is well taken, that you cannot always blame it on God. Although you can say, why didn't God protect me? So that, and prevent this from happening? Why didn't God interfere in the actions of humans? That is both a very deeply emotional and existential discussion, and also philosophical discussion. Should God interfere in humans when they want to do the wrong thing? But then the natural disasters and illnesses, that we could have beautiful discussions on that, and in certain groups I do. But this course is way too short for that. But unfortunately, it would be very interesting. Okay, so go to point 3 then. The Messianic era. People have been waiting for the Messiah, right? Even more so than I am waiting for some papers to come in. Somebody sent me a funny joke about that. So the Messianic era, people expect all kinds of things. I already said, and some people think that there's going to be a miraculous world where you think of something, maybe a piece of cheesecake, and it's going to be there, and you just the clothing, I mean, will grow on trees. I guess no more shopping for the ladies then, but okay. So just have to go into the forest for your clothing, which might be more fun. But what does Maimonides say about, what is his expectation of the Messianic era? He says that the laws of nature will not change. Why? Because God created the laws of nature. The laws of nature are inherent to God's character. It's an outcome of God's will. This is how he designed the world. And doesn't make sense to him that God's going to override the laws of nature, because it's done in a perfect way. The balance in the universe is so pristine that this reflects God's wisdom. Why would God now all of a sudden do unnatural, illogical, silly things if the laws of nature work just as well? So for him, the Messianic era, nothing will change. So what's so different? What's the big deal about the Messianic era? Why were we waiting for this time? So he says, not because he said everything's going to be the same, basically. There's going to be bad people and good people. There's going to be rich people and poor people. It's not going to be a utopian world. So what's the difference? The difference is that there's going to be a Messiah. What's a Messiah? Messiah is a descendant of David, who will be a king. That means that the Jews will have their land, their old ancestral land back, and they will live there in peace, because the Messiah is going to be successful in defeating the enemies that have oppressed the Jews for so many centuries, for such a long time. So it's going to be peace. Other nations are going to join the Jewish people in worshiping God, and there's going to be peace. So and therefore there's going to be a better world, no more war. But not only that, you don't have to invest so much capital in developing and in buying and in purchasing weapons. You don't have to, people are not going to die in war, but also a lot of resources could go to other things. You can actually build up the country much better, much more, because you don't have to invest in weapons, and you're going to have time to study and to evolve better. So it's going to be a better world naturally, in a natural way, just because of the absence of war. All right, go to the fourth point. It's a bit similar to what Saadia Gaon had said. Well, not really. But Saadia Gaon had speculated about prophecy, that there could be a return of prophecy. Now, the idea of prophecy in Maimonides is that a prophet needs to be, and this is all, of course, speculative and theoretical, because there are no prophets now, and also not in the time of Maimonides, but he believed that prophecy could return to the people of Israel, and there could be prophets in the future when the time is ripe. But for a prophet to be a true prophet, he also has to be schooled in logic, in knowledge, in philosophy, and he has to be intelligent, he has to be educated, he has to be basically know about the natural world and natural science. It has to be, he has to first rationally, intellectually evolve, and then God will give him a surplus of extra insight. But you have to be on the ceiling of human knowledge first, before God can lift you over that threshold, so you have no more. So basically, uneducated people, according to him, cannot be prophets. It's interesting. There was, let's say, the prophet Obadiah in the Bible. He was a shepherd, and it doesn't seem that he was quite educated. There's been a few cases, I think. But this is Maimonides, and maybe it has to do. Maybe it's an under the table kick to Islam, saying that Islam cannot be true because it is known, and it's actually promoted knowledge in Islam as a proof of the miraculous character of the Quran, that Muhammad was not educated, that he couldn't read or write. That's seen in Islam as proof that it has to come from God, because Muhammad wouldn't be able to produce such beautiful verses and texts on his own, as he wasn't educated. So it's the opposite idea. Maimonides says this is not proof that it is divine. For him, it is proof that it cannot be divine, because an uneducated prophet for him doesn't exist, which is very interesting. He doesn't mention Islam, mind you. It's just reading between the lines, and just my thought, but this is my suspicion at least. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And by the way, his ideas about Islam are not all that negative, and we saw he lived outwardly as a Muslim, so he knew Islam really, really well. Also, he doesn't believe in demons. He believes that those are just imbalances in evil. People would contribute things that weren't explainable, let's say diseases, to demons. If you're healthy and all of a sudden you get fever, what happened? People had no idea about germs. So people say, all of a sudden he's struck with fever. Where does that come from? And so it's natural for people in the olden days to think that there's some supernatural, some metaphysical things at hand, i.e. a demon. But he says, no, these things aren't demons. Those are diseases that come from, and he also didn't know about germs, but it seems that he describes demons as basically just metaphors for germs, but he calls it imbalances. Okay. He also doesn't believe in astrology. Astrology was a very popular, quote unquote, science. People thought, you can measure astrology. It's based on measurements of the stars, and make calculations and predictions of where the star is going to be, or this planet is going to be a month from now. So it really looked like an exact science, and people thought it was a science. They thought that the planets had influence on humans, and you can actually study that. He doesn't believe that. We're going to hopefully, if we have enough time, see that for ourselves. This is very important. People used to go to graves of holy people. If there's a grave of a prophet or a grave of a very holy, revered rabbi, people would go there. And some people would ask for how do you say, for this holy person to interfere, to he's closer to God, so could he actually ask God for something? Or like it's like an intermediate. He says visiting a grave and asking a deceased person, a saint, for something, that is idolatry. He's very radical. If you do that, you are like an idol worshiper. You should only direct your prayers to God and to nothing else, not even to very holy people, because this takes away your devotion to God. And so this was a radical point of view. I would also dare to say it is very much in line with the Almohad theology that he lived under for quite a while. So once again, you might be able to see a connection between the Almohads and Maimonides. And this was one of the things that people were upset because this was a practice that many people did. So there are still two groups of people in Judaism. Many people go to graves and they think it's a religious thing to do and it's kosher, whatever. But people who follow Maimonides say absolutely not. You cannot. You can go to a grave for a memorial and to ponder upon the person and to think about their lives, but you cannot. And you can even pray at a grave, at a grave to God, maybe in the presence of this grave, where the body of the saint is just. But you cannot direct your prayer to this holy person. So that is Maimonidean, and once again, not everybody follows that. Although, funny enough, there are people, and we're going to see that in a few weeks, that there are people who claim to follow Maimonides and still practice these things, even though it goes against Maimonides, which for me, up to this day, is a mystery how that's possible. Okay, once again, we'll go on this slide to number 4. We spoke about the fact that God is not human and that he doesn't change. So then the issue is, and this comes up with Maimonides very prominently, that if God doesn't change, that we cannot change God, even not through prayer. So we cannot. So how can we ask God to do something for us? If he doesn't change, then there are no actions of God in the human sense of the word. It would be that God is always acting in a consistent way, but he wouldn't change his cause of action because you bring to his attention a sick person. So what would it do? He says, the person who prays, if you pray deeply and you become a better person because of praying, you become basically on God's wavelength. And then you pray. Maybe it changes you, that you think of the person and you think, how can I help this person? Or maybe your faith changes. Let's say, okay, let me try to explain. I sometimes explain this with a metaphor. After I take a sip of water, the metaphor is, if we compare God with the sun, all right? I know it's unworthy for God because it's much bigger, but let's do that. Just let's say the sun. Now, the sun, we now know that the sun isn't constant. The sun has flares, solar flares, and it's whatever. But on the face of it, let's imagine that the sun is always doing its thing and it never changes. So, okay, it's always just radiating. It's burning and it radiates light and warmth. Okay, so the sun doesn't change. The Egyptians used to pray to the sun, but the sun doesn't change. Okay, so let's compare God to the sun. You could say that according to if I would be a sun worshiper, I would think that the sun could sometimes be angry. Let's say I'm in the desert and the sun is blaring on me. Oh no, that's not the word. It's like pounding on me, and I'm thirsty and I'm hot and I get burned, and it's like the sun is punishing me, right? But is the sun really doing that? It's because I am in a certain situation. I find myself in a situation where the sun is, quote unquote, acting in an angry way. But let's say I'm in Alaska, and it's not as hot as in the or as in the desert. And I would just sit in the sun like this, and I would enjoy the rays of the sun. And for me in Alaska, it feels like the sun is caressing me, is feeding me, is nurturing me, is making me happy. But it's the same sun. So this son could be angry for one, quote unquote angry, or compassionate for another, but it depends on where we are, right? So maybe you could say that for God is doing the same thing constantly, but in order to receive God's love or God's anger, it depends where we are in our lives. If where we are in relationship to God, if we are on good terms with God, if we, as I said, when you pray deeply with your soul, your soul could be on God's wavelength closer. That means we are in a good spot. So God's influence, so to say, is nurturing, is kind. But if we go against God, then we are like the person in the desert. We are up in opposition with God, and then what happens to us? Maybe in Hinduism it's called karma. It would be a similar thing basically. You have a bad karma, and bad things happen to you. That's like because you're in the wrong position in your relationship with God. Okay, so let's say prayer changes the person who prays, meaning it brings you in a better place, in a better relationship with God, and then more things can happen. And maybe then the influence that you receive, maybe even on behalf of a person that you pray for, meaning that your wishes, your prayers, your thoughts have an effect. Because you're in a good place, it have an effect for that person. Does that make sense at all? I hope so. Zahid is coming in. Right. He also says, this is also very interesting, acting against reason is acting against God, meaning God is reason. God never goes against reason. God created the world according to to an order. So being disorderly, being chaotic, that's the same thing as acting against reason. That is acting against God. So therefore, he's always making wrong decisions knowingly is already not being in line with God. So if you do the wrong thing knowingly, that is same as sin, right? But it could be things that are not called sin. Let's say you know you're going to be sick if you eat something, or you stay up all night, whatever. Then that would be similar, right? Because you know you're doing something destructive. Perhaps, I mean, unless you have a very good reason to do it, because whatever, a deadline, or you're taking care all night long of a sick person, of course that's different. But just then you have a good things and bad things have to be weighed together, and it's different. But so let's say getting drunk for him is like idol worship. So a little bit of alcohol is not forbidden according to Judaism, but see, he says at the last line on the bottom, it says one may only drink, according to Maimonides, a small amount of wine, because that we know from many texts in the Bible that it's not forbidden, and we actually drink wine often to sanctify the Sabbath and holidays, but a small amount only with a meal. So it's always done before, at the beginning of the meal, these prayers over wine. And because why? It's reasonable. It is makes sense. It might help you to digest things a little better. However, if you, let's say, have a problem with your digestion and you get sick from it, then you shouldn't do it. Then you should find another way. There are alternative ways to sanctify the Sabbath. But getting drunk, that is like idol worship, because you're erasing your rationality, and that means you're totally not in line with God, and you're actually doing something against God, which is you're actually, in your mind, reason is totally blurred, and your ideas of God are blurred, therefore. And that's the same as idol worship. Idol worship is that you create the wrong image of God. The question is, some people have a tradition. It occurs a lot in Ashkenazi tradition communities for the holiday of Purim, and even for Simchat Torah. I've heard, but I've never seen that. But luckily, I've never seen either. But that people actually believe they have to get drunk on Purim, which is, Maimonides would say, this is the most abhorrent thing, and it brings the religion low. And this is all based on an interpretation of a text in the Talmud, which I believe personally also is wrongly interpreted. I don't think it's ever good to be drunk, unforgivable, but okay. In any case, this is a contention. Yeah, okay. We'll go to the next slide. Laws of nature are a reflection of God's design. I already explained that in different words. So everything is created according to God's wisdom, reason, logic, in Greek logos, right? So miracles are a bit of a problem, because a miracle is basically God overriding the laws of nature, which means he goes against his own design. If possible, Maimonides does not totally rule out miracles in this sense of the word, because a miracle could be, but a miracle is often could be the use of laws of nature. Laws of nature, things could be so, even within the laws of nature, you could have amazing breakthroughs. Let's say that the splitting of the sea was a natural wind and a natural movement of tide, which is an extreme tidal thing, which happens maybe sometimes. Depends how you interpret the text, of course. But let's say it was all natural. The fact that it happened at that moment, at that time, exactly when it was needed for the people to escape, and that the water came back exactly when the hostile army was almost getting to them, that's could be totally in line with the laws of nature, but it's still miraculous that it happened at that time and in that manner, in that place. Right, okay. And then he says, reason, and this is the old idea that we saw in Kalam, that reason and revelation have to be the same. So the revelation, meaning Torah or Quran or whatever it is, when in Maimonides' case, the Torah, and the other books of the Hebrew Bible, cannot go against reason, because that would be against God's design. So if we read the things that contradict the Bible, and we see things that go against reason, then Maimonides says we must have misunderstood the Bible and we need to reinterpret it. Meaning, we saw that last week with Midrash, but he actually says it of the Bible text itself. So perhaps, to give an example, this in the Garden of Eden, the paradise, Adam and Eve, the first humans, the story is that the snake spoke to Eve and told her she could comfortably eat from that tree, even though God forbade it, nothing's going to happen. Okay, so Maimonides says animals don't have a gift of reason, of speech. He would think that they don't have the faculty of reason, and therefore they couldn't talk. But we now would, even if it would be a very smart snake, even chimpanzees or gorillas could be very smart, but they don't have the vocal cords, so they don't have the speech instrument. They don't have the same way. They couldn't even speak for other reasons. In any case, that's a modern interpretation of this. He says, no, this has to be interpreted metaphorically. It was a dream, and it had a deeper meaning. It wasn't a real talking snake, according to Maimonides. He even says, so was a big discussion in the time and among the philosophers. Is the world really created out of nothing? Or and people, we spoke about this a few times, I think already, people who are religious said, no, the world is created out of nothing, even though the Torah doesn't really say that so clearly, but this is how the Torah was understood. And a lot of the philosophers said, no, it's not possible. That's not logical. That things come out of nothing. So matter has already always existed. These were called materialists, people who believed in the eternity of matter. Maimonides even says, and if Aristotle's argument for the eternity of matter, meaning Aristotle, Maimonides is a big follower of Aristotle in many ways, but not in this way. Aristotle believed that matter was eternal and therefore not created out of nothing. He says if his arguments were convincing, Maimonides says, I would have no problem reinterpreting the story of creation, meaning he could interpret, if he thought it was necessary, take the story that the world is created in 6 days, explain this metaphorically to reconcile it with eternity of matter, which is an amazing statement. And of course, people thought, what? You would, Maimonides, you would take our sacred tradition and our ages, centuries long interpretation and understanding that the world is created out of nothing. You would actually change that around to fit Aristotle's idea, even though you're not doing it because you don't believe, but you would be willing to do that. So that was a shock. Okay. Now, this was all about the book. Once again, The Guide of the Perplexed. Just a few snippets from The Guide of the Perplexed. It's a big book and we could study a whole course, do a whole course on it, but we are not. So I had to go through these. And of course, it takes a lot of time. Maimonides as a rabbi. Another book, we spoke about the Book of the Lamp. We spoke about the Guide of the Perplexed. Now we talk about the book called Mishneh Torah. It's a very influential work. And it's a summary of Jewish law. This is the first one that's a summary. Always you had the discussions in the Talmud and people study that in depth. But Maimonides took, we're going here, this is written in Hebrew because this is later in life, and he already saw that people were leaving the Arabic world and more people were actually living in the Christian world. So not everybody knew Arabic. And so that he started towards the end of his life writing in Hebrew more to make it understandable for others. Mishneh Torah was meant to be read by everybody. The Guide of the Perplexed was for people who were into philosophy. And that happened in the Arabic world, not in the Christian world. But go back here to Mishneh Torah. He wanted everybody to know that. So what's the big deal about a summary of Jewish law? After studying all the discussions in the Talmud, Maimonides wrote down the actual outcome of these discussions in the Mishneh Torah. So he skipped all these long discussions and opinion A and opinion B and a challenging of the reasoning of opinion B and whatever, all that just, and the Talmud often doesn't give the outcome of the discussion, what is now the ruling, but he decided what the ruling was based on his insights, and he only brought down the laws, the outcomes of these discussions, even though the outcomes are, as I said, not always clear, but he distilled the outcomes from the discussions and wrote down all the laws to make it easy. All the commandments and rules are now organized by topic. So in the Talmud, you would find laws on Shabbat in a tractate called Shabbat, but in the tractate of Shabbat, it's not only about Shabbat, it sidetracks to so many in other things. And in other tractates that go about totally different topics, you will actually find discussions on Shabbat. So every topic is all over the Talmud. So you have to know so much. And it's amazing that Maimonides, with his busy work, that he was able to do this. So he put everything from different places in the Talmud and put them all together in topic. He didn't put source references where he got it from because he wanted to keep it simple and overseeable. And now this is a shocker. He says, from now on, now we have all the rules clearly written out. Now you don't have to study the Talmud anymore. He says here, see the last point? From now on, Talmud study is superfluous. In his words, all anyone needs from now on is the Torah and this book. So all the Talmud, you can just dump. Right. You only need the Mishneh Torah and the Torah. Mishneh Torah means repetition, or a summary of the Torah. So, and by the way, it's not the same as Mishnah, Mishneh Torah, right? So it sounds very similar. Here is a quote. I want to ask somebody, is anyone willing to read here? I don't see any living faces. Let me go to Andy. Andy, would you like to read this? Are you here?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Before me, there were Gonim and great men who composed tracts in Hebrew or Arabic to determine the ruling in specific matters. But establishing the rulings of entire Talmud and all the law of the Torah, no one has done this before since the days of our holy Rabbi, Judah the Prince and his holy companions.
Right. Judah the Prince was the one who wrote the Mishnah. But he's saying there were people who wrote summaries of the rulings of certain topics, maybe only on Shabbat or maybe on only kosher. He says, I did it of everything. It never happened before. Will you continue?
Maimonides wrote to his student Yosef ibn Sjimon, I urge you not to neglect the study of this book until you apprehend all of it. Make it your own book, teach it everywhere, and make its usefulness known. Because the intended purpose of the Talmud was lost and has vanished.
Meaning the real purpose of the Talmud. What is the real purpose of the Talmud? He thinks the real purpose of the Talmud is to come to answers of what the rules are.
The purpose of the erudite today is to waste time in Talmudic discussions.
We already saw with Rashi, but with Tosafot, that the goal of people, the highest goal of people in traditional Ashkenazi communities is to study Talmud, study all the discussions and memorize the discussions even. He says, wasting time in Talmudic discussions, yes?
As if its only intention was to exercise polemical skills. That, however, was not its primary intention. Discussions and polemics occurred only accidentally. Therefore, I was moved to return to the initial purpose.
So that was just a necessity to get to the points, to get to reach the to get to the answers, what the rulings are, and that's what I now did. I fixed it. Yes.
In his introduction to the book of Precept.
Story has to be an S here. Yeah.
Precepts, a separate book that lists all the commandments Maimonides says about the Mishneh Torah. I saw fit to prepare a composition that includes all the laws and commandments of the Torah, and to avoid mentioning disagreements and positions that were rejected, and to list only final rulings. I also choose to omit the justifications and arguments in support of each ruling, and the names of the transmitters.
Yeah, he left everything out. Even though it's a work of Jewish law, the Mishneh Torah shows clear philosophical influence. And by the way, we already saw that the Almohads, the Muslims, right, these fundamentalists, that they wanted to make Islam clear and overseeable and concise and make it systematic. And this is exactly what Maimonides does, right? And so that is a philosophical approach. Philosophical notions are in the Mishneh Torah embedded in Jewish law. For instance, according to Maimonides, believing in one incorporeal God, a God without a body, is a commandment. So that used to be a part discussed in Jewish thought, but it was not seen as a commandment that you cannot believe that God has no body, right? That wasn't ever, wasn't ever defined as such. Therefore, to believe in divine anthropomorphisms is heresy and idolatry. Also, as I mentioned before, God is reason. Thus, anything that is irrational goes against God and against his will. Now, let's read a bit of that. Maybe I'm going to Justin Miranda Paz, would you like to read this?
Yeah, sure.
Good.
So the laws of the foundations of the Torah, chapter 1. The foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdom is to know that there is a primary being who brought into being all that exists.
Right. It's a primary being sounds very abstract. It doesn't say like a father or a king it's a being, right? It's almost, yeah. Mm-hmm.
He alone is true, and no other entity possesses truth compared to his truth. This is what the Torah means when it says, there is nothing else aside from him. Aside from him, there is no true existence. This entity is the God of the universe and the Lord of the entire world.
Now, this might be philosophical, but it also sounds quite mystical, for those who know what I mean. There's nothing else aside from him, meaning there's no existence about God. That the question is, are we really existing then? Or are we part of God? Because if we exist, then we have to exist inside of God. Maybe we are God's thoughts, or I mean, you can come to very interesting conclusions. The fact that maybe we only exist because God, who knows? I don't know. This is puzzling to me. I don't know exactly what I can speculate, but I'm not 100% sure what he means. But it opens the door to mystical speculations for sure. Yes.
This God is one. For the Creator to have a body or form, he would have limitations because it is impossible for a body to be unlimited. Since he is not a body, the circumstances associated with bodies that produce division and separation are not applicable to him. Therefore, it is impossible for him to be anything other than one.
Yeah. Could you want to continue?
Behold, it is explicitly stated in the Torah and in the prophets that the Holy One, blessed be he, has no body or physical form, as it is written. For the Lord is God in heaven above and on the earth below, and a body cannot exist in two places.
Right. So, what is the meaning of the expressions used in the Torah? Below his feet, written by the finger of God, God's hand, God's eyes, God's ears, and other such expressions. I'll go to maybe Janelle. Would you like to read this?
Sure. All these expressions are to relate to a human level of understanding which knows only a corporeal reality.
Yeah, physical, whatever, yeah.
Therefore, the Torah speaks in the language of humans. There are only descriptive terms such as I will whet my lightning sword. Does he have a sword? Does he need a sword? Rather, this is a metaphoric image.
Yes, meaning that the Torah speaks in language of humans. It's a very important notion that the way people speak, that because it's human language, so it uses human language and human expressions, even though the reality is beyond language in a way. Yes?
Since it has been clarified that he does not have a body or physical form, it is also clear that none of the functions of a body apply to him. Neither connection nor separation, neither place nor measure, neither standing nor sitting. He is not within time, so that he would have a beginning and end or age. He does not change. Neither sleeping nor walking, neither anger nor laughter, neither joy nor sadness, neither silence nor speech. If he would sometime be enraged and at times be happy, he would change. All these things are only true for those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is dust. In contrast, he is elevated and exalted above all this.
Very nice. Now, this is philosophy. This is really interesting because this is written in a book with laws, and the fact that he put this in a law book, that was absolutely an innovation. But now let's go into study the Mishneh Torah a little bit, and look at laws. Even the laws are very much straightforward, and we'll go to the laws of prayer, which is chapter 7 of the laws of prayer. And I will go to maybe Danjina, would you like to read this?
When a person wakes up after he's done sleeping, he says while he's still in bed, "My God, the soul that you have placed within me is pure. You created it, you formed it, you breathed it to me, and you preserve it within me. You will ultimately take it from me and restore it to me in the time to come. As long as the soul is lodged within me, I give thanks to you, Lord my God, Master of all worlds. Blessed are you, who restores soul to lifeless bodies.
Meaning when you wake up, and that's before anything, you thank God that you are alive, basically, that he gave you a soul, and that you're still, and you say that as long as the soul is in you, you thank God, and etc. It's like dedicating yourself. And then people would hear roosters. There were no alarm clocks. There were roosters in villages, and very, very early, before anything, roosters start crowing. What do you hear when you hear the sound of the rooster, Tangina? What do you
Blessed
say?
are
Sorry. Yeah.
oh, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives the rooster understanding to distinguish between day and night.
Right. And you see all these is called blessings. All start with the same introduction. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. Then you rub your eyes. You open your eyes. What do you say?
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who opens the eyes of the blind.
And then you sit up in bed.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who unchains those who are bound.
And then you put your feet on the ground.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who spreads the earth over the waters.
Very good. Now you get up. You stand up.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who straightens those who are bent.
And now you wash your hands. Before you wash your hands, you say,
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sacrificed us with his commandments and command us the washing of the hands.
yeah, some people who are Jewish and who are already thinking, this is really peculiar. Because, for instance, the practice is to say this blessing after you wash your hands and not right after and not before. And all these other blessings are said not in these occasions necessarily, but just one after the other when you're already dressed. But then he continues and he says, before you wash your face, you say,
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who removes the bound of sleep from my eyes and slumber from the eyelids.
and after you wash your face, you say,
May it be your will, Lord my God and God of my ancestors, that you accustom me to perform good deeds and not sins or transgressions.
transgressions. Yeah.
Transgression. May my good inclination have the upper hand over me and not my bad inclination. Strengthen me in your commandments and give me a share in your Torah. Let me find favor, loving kindness, and mercy in your eyes, and in the eyes of all who you see me. Bestow upon me gifts and benevolent kindness. Blessed are you, Lord, who bestows gifts and benevolent kindness.
Yeah, that was a good deeds. That was a good deed, Tangina. Thank you so much. I'll go to Yaakov. Is that okay? Before you put on your clothes, or I'm sure you put on something. You have to wear something to say this. But when you put on your clothes, what do you say, Yaakov?
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who clothes the naked.
And then you put on a belt.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who girds Israel with strength.
Yeah, and early in the morning, you're not thinking of girls yet. Okay, then you cover your head.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who crowns Israel with glory.
And you put on shoes.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has provided me with all of my needs.
Yeah, like in the olden days, shoes. A lot of people walked barefoot, and having shoes that was really fancy. So that was really are in good shape if you can own some good shoes. And you go out. You say,
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who prepares the steps of man.
Yeah, those are all blessings that in most communities are said either in synagogue or at home just before you start doing your prayers. But the Maimonides says the following.
These blessings have no particular order. Instead, one recites each of them in connection to what it refers to when it occurs. For example, if one fastens his belt while still in bed, that is when he recites, who girds Israel with strength.
Yeah, so it's not that you have to first say the one, this one, right? And then that, but if you do it in opposite order, then that's how you say it also. Yeah.
Or if someone hears the sound of the roosters, that is when he recites, who gives understanding to the rooster.
Yeah, even if you're already up. Uh-huh.
Any blessing which is not applicable should not be recited. For instance, someone who sleeps with his clothing on upon rising should not recite the blessing, who clothes the naked.
Right. Or
someone who walks barefoot should not recite the blessing, who has provided me with all my needs.
Because you could say, well, he still provides me with all my needs. I have shoes. I have tons of pairs of shoes in the closet. No, it is referring to wearing shoes, and that's when you say it. Okay. Yeah.
The people in most of our cities have the custom to recite these blessings one after the other in the synagogue, whether they are applicable or not. This is a mistake, and it is not proper to follow this practice. One should not recite a blessing unless it is applicable.
He's actually saying when this blessing, for instance, who gives understanding to a rooster, is supposed to be said when you hear a rooster. So if you don't hear a rooster, but on your alarm clock, you live in Manhattan, how many times do you hear a rooster? Not often. So he says then you shouldn't say it because that is actually using saying a blessing for not the right purpose is actually falls under the category of using the name of God in vain, believe it or not. That is an established principle. So I sometimes I'm asked to lead the service in the synagogue, the early part of the service, and in the synagogue it's customary. So for the congregation, I say all these blessings one after the other. But for myself at home, I follow Maimonides, and I say this blessing when I put on my belt, and I do it in that way. So the rooster blessing, that's very, very, very rare, and it's definitely not in Manhattan. The last time I said it was when I spent the night with friends in an Arab village in Israel, and they have roosters there, and then I can say it. It's one of the reasons I like to go there, because then I have an opportunity to do something exactly how it's meant to be. Thank you so much, Jacob. That was beautiful. I'm going to Jaden. Did you read? I don't think so, right, Jaden? Okay.
No, not yet.
Okay, go ahead. Now, we were leaving the Mishneh Torah for now, and now we're looking at some of his letters that he wrote as a rabbi when people ask him questions.
Maimonides?
Maimonides.
Oh, sorry. Maimonides wrote letters in which he offered people advice and guidance.
And now it's a letter to the Jews of Yemen, right? Let me do the introduction. After the appearance of a false Messiah, somebody who claimed to be the Messiah, the Jews in Yemen had been forced to convert to Islam by the local ruler. After this ruler was overthrown and replaced by someone else, the new ruler allowed Jews to return to Judaism. But
they worried that perhaps their conversions to Islam had been equivalent to a holy oath. Should they return to Judaism, or should they keep that oath and remain Muslims?
What's Maimonides' answers?
You write that the rebel leader in Yemen forced the Jewish inhabitants of all the places he had subdued to abandon their Jewish religion, just like the Berbers had forced them to do in the West.
Yeah, he's talking about the Almohads, his people. Yeah, not his people.
Truly, this news has broken our backs and has astounded and dumbfounded the whole of our community. You write that the hearts of some people have turned away, that uncertainty came over them. Their beliefs were weakened, while others have not lost their faith. And now, my co-religionists, it is essential for you all to give attention to what I'm going to point out to you. You should impress it upon the minds of your women and children so that their faith may be sorry. May the Lord deliver us and you from religious doubt.
Okay, we'll strengthen your reading skills. Don't worry. Yeah.
Remember that ours is the true and authentic divine religion, revealed to us through Moses, the master of all prophets, both the former and the later, through which God has distinguished us from the rest of mankind.
I'll do one more.
This did not happen because of our merits, but rather as an act of divine grace and on account of our forefathers who knew God and submitted to him. God has made us unique by his laws and precepts, and our preeminence is manifested in
right?
preeminence is manifested in his rules and statutes.
Yeah, I'll go to Yakira.
Therefore, all the nations, instigated by envy and impiety, rose up against us, and all the kings of the earth, motivated by injustice and hatred, persecuted us. They tried to hinder God, but he cannot be hindered. Ever since the time of Revelation, every despot or slave that has risen to power has made it his goal and his final purpose to destroy our law, and to abolish our religion by means of the sword, by violence, or by brute force. This is one of the two classes which attempt to oppose the divine will.
So there's a class. The class is a despot who tried to destroy Judaism through force. Mm-hmm.
The second class consists of the most intelligent and educated among the nations. These also try to demolish our law and to abolish it through arguments that they invent and through controversies which they create. They try to make the law powerless and to wipe out every trace of it through their arguments, just as tyrants plan to do it with the sword. After that, a new group arose that combined these two methods, namely conquest and arguments, into one, because they believed that this would be more effective in wiping out every trace of the Jewish nation and religion.
I think he's talking about Christianity and Islam because there were both arguments of why Judaism was superseded and replaced, right? And secondly, there's also was force involved, right?
The first one to have adopted this plan was Jesus the Nazarene. He was a Jew because his mother was Jewish. He persuaded people to believe that there was a prophet sent by God to clarify questions from the Torah, and that he was the Messiah that was predicted by every prophet. He interpreted the Torah and its precepts in a way that would lead to its total annulment, to the abolition of all its commandments, and to the violation of its prohibitions.
Yeah, if you remember, I personally believe that Jesus did not do that, but that it was mostly Paul after him. But that's besides the point. This is what his impression is. Mm-hmm.
After him arose the madman, who emulated his precursors since he paved the way for him.
Yeah, so Muhammad is often called the madman. It's a code word. And that is based on hadith, actually, that Muhammad had when he had the prophecy. He would become he would get convulsions and basically would be a way. It's similar to epilepsy. Basically, it looks like he was shaking. He was on the ground, and then when he woke up, he said, "I got a message." That was seen by many people and non-Muslims as a sign of a demon. So they thought this was not from God but from a demon. And majnun is the word for madman, but it actually comes from the word jinn, which actually the same word madman and possessed is the same word. So that is not a kind word for Muhammad, but that's what he uses.
But he added the additional goal of imposing rule and submission, and he invented his well-known religion. All these men aimed at placing their teachings on the same level with our divine religion. But only a simpleton who lacked knowledge of both would equate divine institutions with these human practices.
Yeah, maybe do one more.
Sure. Now, my brothers in the diaspora, it behooves you to encourage one another, the elders to guide the youth, and the leaders to direct the masses. Agree with the truth that is immutable and unchangeable, and to the following beliefs of a religion that shall never fail.
Yeah, he's basically the people were very distraught. They thought we were Jewish, we were defeated. We actually, how do you say, we surrendered to Islam. Shall we go back? Now he's trying to make them proud of their heritage and that they should not be they should be proud of themselves, right? And help them have courage. Maybe I will. Okay, yeah, let's continue. I'll go to who else? Maybe Abigail.
The entire Torah was divinely revealed to Moses, of whom it was said, "With him do I speak mouth to mouth." It will neither be abrogated nor superseded, neither supplemented nor abridged. Never
See,
shall it be
this is basically
supplanted.
The abrogation, right? This is what he's talking about. Mhm.
Never shall it be supplanted by another divine revelation. Remember, my co-religionists, that this great, incomparable, and unique historical event is attested by the best of evidence. For never before, ever since, has a whole nation witnessed a revelation from God or beheld his splendor.
Right.
Remember, my brothers, that because of our sins, God has placed us in the midst of this people, the Arabs, who have persecuted us severely and placed poisonous and discriminatory laws against us. Never did our nation molest, degrade, debase, and hate us as much as they.
So he says that this is talking about the Pact of Omer, the Dhimmi laws. He says this is horrendous. Of course, he didn't probably know about what was happening in the time of the Crusade, but this was okay. But now let's see what he really thought of Islam, which is going to be very interesting. This is a letter to a rabbi called Obadiah, and many people. I already spoke about Prophet Obadiah. There was a prophet called Obadiah or Obadiah, and the tradition teaches that he was a convert, and therefore many people who convert often choose the Hebrew name as their Jewish name, Obadiah. So this was a rabbi, Obadiah, who was actually a convert, and he was an ex-Muslim. He converted from Islam, which, that's okay. So this Rabbi Obadiah, who at the time lived in Christian lands, was told by others, by people from Christian lands, that Islam was idol worship. And he thought, that's not true. He couldn't accept that. And he wrote Maimonides and asked him, is really true? So what is Maimonides' answer, Abigail?
These Ishmaelites are not idol worshippers at all, and they assign the proper unity to God, a unity which has no imperfection. Even though they lie about us and tell tales and say that we claim that God has a son, we should not lie and say that they're idol worshippers.
So meaning there is a notion, it's actually mentioned in the Quran, that Jews say Ezra, which is somebody from Jewish history, an important person. Ezra is the son of God. Now, Jews that I mentioned to this never heard of this, and there's, as far as we know, never been any group who actually believed that, unless you would think that there was maybe a sect in the time of Muhammad that said that, but we have no indication whatsoever. And so it would just be one group. In any case, people often, because they read this in the Quran, believe and teach and preach that Jews are not really monotheists because they believe that God has a son, i.e. Ezra. And he says that's a lie. But he says we should not lie. We shouldn't do the same thing. We should not say that they are idol worshippers because they're not. They are pure monotheists. Yes?
Even if a person says that the house which they glorify is a house of idol worship and that their fathers worshipped idols in the same house, so what? Those who bow down there today have their hearts directed to heaven. Our sages already said that if a person bows down to a house of idol worship and he thinks that it is a synagogue, indeed his heart is devoted to heaven.
Yeah, there is a story that when Muhammad took over Mecca, that he cleansed the Kaaba and there were idols in there. supposedly, according to the Sirah, 365 idols, maybe one idol god for every day of the year. Who knows? We don't know. But in any case, so there was at a certain point of time, it was a house of idol worship. But Maimonides says that doesn't matter at all. It doesn't mean that they do idol worship. Today they don't. I'm going to Tarina. Is that okay, Tarina? Can you read this?
Such are all these Ishmaelites today, including
That's a code word for Arabs, huh? Or Muslims, right?
Including children and women. Idol worship is wiped out from their mouths. Their error and foolishness is in other matters, which is impossible to tell in writing. But in the unity of God, they have no errors at all.
So we don't know what errors or foolishness he's talking about, because he doesn't say it. He doesn't want to put it in writing. But he says they believe in God's unity, and so they are pure. And very interesting. Continue.
All in all, even though the origin of certain things is from the idol worship, there is no person in the world who throws stones, and no one prostrate to that place, and no one does any of these things for the sake of idol worship, and not with his mouth and not in his heart, but rather each one directs his heart to heaven.
Yeah, so their heart is pure, purely devoted to God. That's what he means. Yes.
As far as there is any blame directed against the Muslims, it is not based on their worship or relation to God, but rather on other matter, which is impossible to tell in writing. It is not the religious aspect that is wrong, rather that they tell lies about the Jews, as we see in their claim that Jews ascribe a son.
Yeah, I already mentioned that. Quickly on astrology, he does not, and this is also in his letters, but I'm going to skip it a bit. But he's saying there's a person who wrote that said, we are backwards, and we are not good in studying. He says this person, because we were born under our nation is basically born, our country is born under the wrong stars. And he says nothing to do with that, because even King Solomon was born under the same constellation, and he was wiser than all men. So he doesn't believe astrology at all. He says it's all based on nonsense. That's what Maimonides says. Now, as a doctor, and we have 3 more minutes, he served under Caliph, the Fatimid Caliph, and then later under Saladin. That's the one who conquered Jerusalem from the Crusaders. He wrote an oath for physicians. So that's actually in Israel, when you become a doctor and you graduate, this is the oath you take. It's basically a prayer to God to help you only think of the well-being of the patient and not about your own honor. Then he became the Nagid. He became the leader of the Jewish community, and he had to work. He was also fundraising, just like Yehuda Halevi was, for captives, people who had been taken captive by the Crusaders. We saw that before, that prominent Jews were often court physicians, and there are pros because you're close to the throne and you can advocate for Jewish interests, but it was very heavy. And this, I would like to read a bit. He basically says, my duties are very heavy. I'm obliged to visit him every day, early in the morning, and when he or any of his children or his concubines are indisposed, I cannot leave Cairo, but I must stay during most of the day in the palace. It also frequently happens that one or more of the officers fall sick, and I must attend to their healing. Therefore, as a rule, every day early in the morning, I go to Cairo. Even if nothing unusual happens there, I do not return to Fustat until the afternoon. Then I'm famished, but I find the rooms filled with people, both Jews and Gentiles, nobles and common people, judges and policemen, friends and enemies, a mixed multitude, and they await the time of my return, all patients. I get up from my animal, I wash my hands, and I go to my patients, and I treat them to bear with me while I partake some light refreshments. This is the only meal I eat in 24 hours. Then I go to attend to my patients, and I write prescriptions, and I tell them and directions for how to treat them. Patients go in and out until nightfall, and sometimes until 2 hours more into the night. I talk to them, and I prescribe medicines for them while I'm laying on the couch from sheer fatigue. When the night falls, I'm so exhausted I can hardly speak. So that's maybe why he didn't live as long as he could have lived. He wrote books on medicine and on treatment and on diets. Very interesting. I had a student who wrote 2 papers, a double paper on Maimonides' diets, and she became a dietitian, and she's now an adjunct professor in dietary treatments. Very interesting. But she thought it was, and I still have her paper. It was really cool because it's very, very modern. But basically, based on his philosophy, he says never extreme, always balance. So balance in eating, balance in diet, balance in drinking, even sexuality, balance, which means not indulging, but also not totally abstaining. Balance in emotions. Don't go crazy about, try to be stable. Exercise and fresh air are very important. And he wrote about asthma, diabetes, hepatitis, pneumonia, impotence. The Sultan, the son of Saladin, was very much into indulging in sexuality, and he had a big harem with lots of concubines, and he wanted to be very active, and he constantly asked Maimonides to prescribe herbs that would enhance his libido. And Maimonides kept saying, but he was also very depressed. So he says, no, you have to balance everything and be modest, and then your depression will also improve. But he didn't listen. Then I think in the book report, you might have read about King Lionheart. Oh, no, that's in the paragraphs that we just read and that I'm grading right now. But King Lionheart went on a crusade. He wasn't so good for the Jews in his country. And when he was sick, he was in Ashkelon. He asked for Maimonides to treat him. I don't know if he did, but he also asked him to come with him to England and be his court physician. But Maimonides refused. He said, no, England is not a good place for Jews. The question is, which is the real Maimonides? Was it the rabbi or the philosopher? I believe it was both. He died this is the end, so bear with me one more minute. He died in 1204 in Fustat. It's believed that he was buried in his courtyard and that then he was taken to Israel to be reburied. But the caravan who transported Rambam's body from Egypt to Israel was robbed, and the camel with his body ran off into the desert. Months later, people found a camel around Tiberias, a wild camel, and with a body on it. So they were assuming, with no proof, they didn't know Maimonides, Rambam, whatever. They were assuming that was him. So the camels stood at a certain spot. They took this as a sign. They took the body and buried it here, saying this is Maimonides' grave. And now it became a destination for pilgrims, even though Maimonides said it is idol worship to visit a grave and to ask for the person buried there to intercede in heaven. Unfortunately, this is his grave now in Tiberias. People are bending over his grave and praying. And I placed the image of Maimonides with a big tear because I think he would be very upset if he knew this. Okay, this was the class.